Hey everybody, it's Amy Berger here again from toitnutrition.com, bringing you another video on keto without the crazy. I wanted to do a part 2 as a follow-up to my previous video on the ApoE4 issue. It occurred to me actually a couple of days after recording that I wasn't as specific as I meant to be with the dietary recommendations, or not really as specific, but I wanted to explain why I made the recommendations I made. I mean, I kind of said, well, here's what I would do if I was E4, but I didn't really say why. I know that a lot of you are really concerned about this, so I really just wanted to make sure that I dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, as we say in English. Hopefully some of you are watching this overseas and maybe you have similar phrases in your language. Let's see, before we get down to business, thank you as always for watching. Thank you for subscribing. There's about 5,300 subscribers. I value every one of you. I am so humbled and honored and just touched that this is helpful and that you enjoy the information. So, find more of that at my website, toitnutrition.com, but let's go. Not as many notes as usual, but still some notes. So if you didn't watch part 1 of this video, please watch that, because none of this is going to make sense if you haven't seen it. It's just my previous video. I think it's called Keto and ApoE4, or ApoE4 and Keto, something like that. The main premise of that video was that the ApoE4 gene is a hunter-gatherer type gene, right? It's believed to be the oldest form of the ApoE gene in the human family. And because of that, it's sort of hypothesized that the people that carry the E4 gene in the modern day are or at least the people that carry the ApoE4 gene are the least suited for the way we eat and live in the modern day. And as I mentioned in that video, the ApoE4 gene was selected against in human populations with a longer history of grain-based agriculture. And so we sort of extrapolate from that to mean that people with the E4 gene are not well suited for a very high carbohydrate diet. And especially not a high grain, high refined carbohydrate diet, right? If it's a hunter-gatherer gene, they might have gotten some carbohydrate from starchy tubers and roots and, maybe some seasonal fruits, things like that. But it wouldn't have been like 60% of their diet, 50% of the diet, like it is in so much of the world today. Let's see, what else can I say before I want to talk some general stuff? Okay, well, let's move on. Some of this is my opinion, right? This is my opinion right here based on my understanding of the scientific literature. There's a lot of debate over different genes and different genotypes and what they mean for diet and lifestyle. In my opinion, based on my understanding, everyone can thrive or do very well on a lower carbohydrate or ketogenic diet. So everybody can, right? That doesn't mean everybody has to follow that, but we're all humans. Whether or not you carry the ApoE4, or maybe you have ApoE2 or ApoE3 or some combination thereof, whether you have a polymorphism or a mutation in the folate pathway, the MTHFR gene that they talk about, whether you have alterations in the COMT gene, whether or not you have the gene for lactase persistency, meaning the ability to digest the milk sugar lactose, regardless of all that gibbledy-gobbledy-gook, we're all humans. We're all Homo sapiens. We are all the exact same species. I know sometimes it doesn't seem like we are, like people that think differently than you, that vote differently, that pray differently. It can seem, men and women, it can seem like we're different species, but we are all actually Homo sapiens. We have far more in common than we have different. That's why I think, and again, this is just my own thought, that all of us can thrive on the same type of diet, that being a low-ish, lower carb diet, maybe not necessarily keto, but all of us can thrive on low carb. The real question is, who can thrive on a high carb diet? The question is not who should or should not do low carb. The question really is who should or should not do high carb. Hello. It is very, so some of us can, all of us can thrive low carb. Some of us can thrive high carb, but based on my understanding of the scientific literature, if you are an E4, you are not suited to thrive on a high carb diet. Just the way it is. Your genotype is not, it was evolutionarily weeded out in populations that ate a lot of carbs. So you are not suited for a lot of carb diet. So let's see, looking at the notes as always. Okay, so I want to emphasize again, if this is the case, that the E4 was selected against in grain-based societies and in higher carb eating populations, then I still think the number one single most important thing for someone with the ApoE4 gene to do is to eat and live in a way to keep the blood sugar and insulin levels within a healthy range. And I really emphasized that last time. And I really can only talk to the diet. I'm a nutritionist. I can mention that if it is a hunter-gatherer gene, it's not just the diet, right? Because our diet has the most powerful impact on blood sugar and insulin, but it's not the only thing. Your sleep quality and quantity does affect it. We don't even know to the effect that sunlight exposure might affect it. And I don't know why I'm pointing up. I'm pointing to an indoor light. I mean, I'm recording this at I don't know, like 9 o'clock at night. But sunlight exposure might, stress levels, activity levels, the amount of muscle mass you carry. There's a lot of things that affect the blood sugar and insulin, but diet really has the most profound influence. So, and I'm most qualified to talk to the diet anyway. I just did want to plant the seed in your mind that it's not just diet, especially for the E4s. So I do think that controlling the blood sugar and insulin is number one, or if you want to call that number 1 and 2, the sugar and the insulin. Everybody with E4 is concerned about the type of fat in their diet, as I mentioned last time, because the E4s seem to have a hyper response to dietary saturated fat. In a lot of people, saturated fat intake raises cholesterol levels. In the E4s, it seems to really, really raise it. And whether or not this is a concern at all is debatable, right? Like I mentioned last time. If everything else looks good, all the other blood work is stellar, you would like die to be this person. I mean, that's kind of no pun intended. You would kill for blood work like that, except the total cholesterol happens to be high, the LDL happens to be high. Is that even a big deal at all? The jury's kind of out. I personally don't think it's a big deal, but I'm not a physician. That's not medical advice. There's a lot of research still remaining to be done to elucidate whether or not high cholesterol has any negative effect at all in a healthy, fit, active person where all the other blood work is dynamite. So we are still, however, with E4 concerned about the potential for this to be an issue, about the chance that this could be harmful. So definitely the blood sugar, insulin, glycemic control is number 1. If there's a number 2 and a number 3, it's the fat, and not just the dietary fat composition, but the micronutrients, right? Micronutrients means vitamins and minerals. So let's start with the fats. I mentioned last time, obviously saturated fat is the biggest concern for E4s. If you are concerned about that, you can totally do a ketogenic diet that's lower in saturated fat. The number one thing you would look to either eliminate or cut way back on if you want to limit saturated fat is dairy. I know that everybody thinks beef and pork and red meat and bacon, oh, the saturated fat is going to clog your arteries. Nuh-uh. Dairy is the highest source of saturated fat in the modern diet, other than stuff like coconut oil. And so the reason I think you might want to go lower on the dairy if you have the E4 gene is because if this is a hunter-gatherer genotype, hunter-gatherers didn't drink milk from other animals. And I don't think dairy is necessarily harmful. I'm not one of these people that says, well, no other animal species drinks the milk of another animal. I love cheese. I love butter. I love yogurt. I love sour cream. So I enjoy dairy. And I don't think it's harmful per se, but if you are specifically looking to reduce the saturated fat in your diet, dairy is a good place to do that. And hunter-gatherers, did not have domesticated dairy animals that they were milking on a regular basis. I have not looked at the historical record. I don't know what year, what century exactly it was that humans in various parts of the world started to domesticate animals like that, but I'm assuming that the ApoE4 gene, when it was forged all those millennia ago, they were not dairying populations, because it's not a Neolithic gene. It's not an agricultural era gene. So what else? The other thing I mentioned, well, so this is partly with the saturated fat issue and partly with the micronutrient issue that I'll get to in a minute. I mentioned wild game, things like venison, possibly bison, possibly if you are lucky enough to have a hunter in your family or circle of friends, love that person, appreciate that person, buy that person a beer or a wine or a coffee or whatever they like, because God bless the hunters. They can get you, maybe depending on where you live, some caribou, some moose, some, like I said, venison, I mean, wild boar, so pigs that are sort of like wild roaming. These animals will be a little bit lower in saturated fat than, for example, a feedlot raised cow. And I am totally not opposed to feedlots. I mean, I did a video on food quality. You can find that if you want to look for that. The fat profile and the nutrient profile of any ruminant animal, cow, goat, sheep, deer, what have you, is going to be vastly superior to eating processed garbage, to eating, sugary cereal and scones and pastries and soda. Like, the difference between that stuff and a feedlot animal is way bigger than the difference between a feedlot animal and a wild roaming animal, a free range grazing animal. And I don't want to get too far into the details. This video is already going to be longer than I intended it to be. But the point is, if you're super concerned about those fatty acid issues, you might want to, if your budget allows, emphasize grass finished meats, not just grass, raised. Like all cattle start their life on grass. They're put into the feedlot for just the last few months of their life. You might want to seek out a local farm or order online from a farmer that is finishing the animals, so they're on grass the whole time of their lives. Pastured pork, so, and poultry, truly free ranging poultry. Pork and poultry will have more of the omega-6 fat than a ruminant animal, even a feedlot animal. The pork and the poultry will have more omega-6, but the amount of omega-6 in any animal, be it a feedlot cow or a pig or a chicken, is way less than you would get by buying soybean oil and corn oil and cottonseed oil and all grapeseed oil and all that stuff, whether it's to cook with or in your salad dressings, in your packaged foods. So I'm not that concerned about that. In terms of, but their fatty acid profile would be better. The wild animals do have less saturated fat in their body fat and more monounsaturated and poly. And just as a little gee whiz piece of information, different parts of animals have different fatty acid profiles. So if you're a baker or you're familiar with pigs, there's something called leaf lard, L-E-A-F, leaf lard. And if I'm not mistaken, it's the fat that surrounds the kidneys in a pig. And the fatty acid composition of that lard is a little bit different than lard from the rest of the animal. And they've done some studies on ruminants like caribou and moose and cattle and stuff like that. And some of the fatty acid profile differs in the time of year, because it may differ from the types of food they're finding in the wild foraging or the temperature. And so like the fatty acid profile of the shank, the meat on the shank, is different than the fatty acid profile in the larger body of the animal, and it varies through the time of year. So it's really fascinating, which is partly why I am not a huge fan of these calorie trackers and these nutrient trackers, because how do you know when was my animal harvested? When did my animal sacrifice its life to feed me? If it was in December or July, guess what? Those fatty acid profiles are not exactly the same. So let's stop kidding ourselves that we can know the exact composition, the exact micronutrient content of anything, because we don't. Now, Those software trackers are still a good ballpark. They are still absolutely a good estimation. It's better than not knowing anything, but please don't kid yourself into thinking that, your software program knows the exact vitamin A content, the exact vitamin B12 content of the cow you ate in August that was raised in North Carolina versus the cow you ate that was harvested in February that was raised in South Dakota. Literally different animals. Okay, moving on from that, the micronutrient content. So I do think grass finished animals and things like lamb and goat that are generally almost always finished on pasture, and wild caught fish as opposed to farm raised fish are going to be higher in some of the micronutrients. That stuff is very expensive. So if you can't afford that stuff, please do not worry at all. Eating high quality animal foods and low starch vegetables, low carbohydrate vegetables, and nuts and seeds and good quality fats is gonna get you way, way, way more bang for the buck compared to eating starch and sugar and crap. The difference between those two diets is way bigger than the difference between the grass-fed versus the feedlot versus the farmed salmon versus the wild caught and all that. If your budget allows, if you're able to consume some of the slightly better, slightly higher quality stuff, go for it. But don't feel like you are jeopardizing your health or putting your future health, your risk for Alzheimer's, your risk for cardiovascular disease. Like I don't think you're putting that at risk by buying regular food and being true to your budget. Really, I think the most important thing is to avoid the obvious junk, and you know what that is. Let me see if I had anything else. That's pretty much it. I think I also mentioned that in the previous video that, again, and this is total speculation, I don't know that this is true, but again, going off of the idea of the ApoE4 being a hunter-gatherer type gene, you probably had a lower carb diet, but I don't think it would have been zero carb. Maybe at certain times of the year and in certain geographic locations, like in the Arctic, in northern Canada, in the northern US, in northern Europe, maybe even northern Asia, there are parts of the world where you would not have had a lot of plant food, but there's plenty of other parts of the world where you would have had access to some vegetables, to some fruit, whether it was all year long, like in the tropics, you would have access to fruit all year long in the tropics, or maybe seasonally, like in temperate locations. So I don't think you have to be super, super, super keto all the time. I think there's ample room for spinach and broccoli and kale and other greens, and even what is actually low sugar fruit. We don't normally think of things like bell peppers or eggplant or zucchini and other squashes, cucumbers, as fruit, but they are, right? The seeds are on the inside. Botanically, those are fruits. They're not vegetables. I mean, maybe there's an overlap there, but there's some debate over that as to whether E4s are suited to the low sugar fruits or not. If you follow Dr. Stephen Gundry, Gundry, he wrote The Plant Paradox, he would tell you to avoid that stuff. I don't know if I agree with that. I'm not sure how much credence I want to give to his thoughts on that. Again, a zucchini, a cucumber, a green bell pepper, way better for you than a Twinkie, way better for you than a bowl of Lucky Charms cereal. I don't care what genotype you have, like no question there. If you want to dig down into the details, maybe learn a little more about that, about the low sugar fruits. But I think even with that hunter-gatherer genotype, there's room for those kinds of fruits and vegetables in the diet, to tolerance. Check your glucose every now and then, check your ketones possibly every now and then, get your A1C checked every couple of months, make sure that you're still where you want to be. There's some other things you can look for. Maybe I'll do a video on lab tests, not just for E4s, but in general, like tests you want to look for with low carb, but that's not really for this video, that's beyond the scope. If seasonal fruits are okay and those low sugar fruits are okay and the higher, the lower carb vegetables are okay, that doesn't mean that grains are okay. It doesn't mean that beans are okay. It doesn't mean that sugar's okay. I'm not the food police. Eat what you want. If you want to eat that stuff, eat it. I'm just specifically saying for the E4s, the ideal diet probably doesn't include a whole lot of potatoes and rice and and beans and wheat products and all that stuff. It always kind of cracks me up, or maybe it infuriates me. I don't know which does it more, but every now and then there's a headline or a study comes out where they found like grain remnants in some archaeological site. Like, oh, we found this cask of wheat kernels that proves that hunter-gatherers ate wheat, or it proves that mankind was eating rice 5 zillion years ago. All I can say is, okay, so you found some little tiny remnants of a little bit of grain at an archaeological site. Even if that means hominid ancestors or humankind a long, long time ago was eating some amount of grain, can we please recognize that that is not the same as people in the 21st century waking up and eating a bowl of cornflakes with skim milk and a piece of toast and some margarine, and then at 10 or 11 a.m. snacking on a granola bar, and then at 1 p.m. having lunch of a sandwich with some potato chips or some pretzels, and then at 3 p.m. having a scone or a muffin for a snack, and then having pasta for dinner and a cookie for dessert. Can we recognize big time that tiny little bits of grain in a diet a couple thousand years ago is not the same as a constant, ceaseless, never-ending influx of starch and sugar and grain down the human pie hole in 2019. I've said my piece. I'm signing off. I want to leave you with just knowing that if you carry the E4 gene, please don't be scared. It's not a death sentence. You just have to respect what it implies and what it means for you in how you need to construct your diet and how you need to maybe have some lifestyle, strategies for yourself. So that's it. If you have E4, I love you. If you have E2, I love you. If you have E3, I love you. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. My blog, again, is toitnutrition.com. If you like this, if you find this information helpful, I don't have a Patreon account, but I do gladly, blissfully, joyously welcome PayPal donations or contributions. PayPal.com. You can send it to my email address, toitnutrition@gmail.com. And that's it. Until next time, take care.